I am still at the Southland Technology Conference 2013 here at the Hilton Hotel in Long Beach, and with me is a fabulous speaker. We have just come out of Sarita Mabin's presentation. Hello, Sarita.
Hello, Cornelius. How are you?
I am very well. I'm excited. I'm energized. That was probably the fastest 1 hour presentation that I've ever been into. And by fast, I mean it was so entertaining and exciting that it went by like that.
No, and I must say the group was quite enthusiastic, and that energy really just made the time fly by.
Right. Now, the title of your presentation was How to Get More Done with Less Stress. This is something everyone needs, right?
True.
Yeah. You started out the presentation by looking at 5 habits that gave us stress. And what we decided to do is, because we're talking to project managers here, one of these 5 habits is really important for them, and we want to help them to overcome it. But we do want to take a look at the other 4, just on a very high level as well. So let's start out with the first one, perfectionism. What's it with this? Why does it cause us stress?
Well, as I mentioned in the workshop, those of us who are perfectionists, myself included, tend to act as though we have it all handled, so people don't help us. So the biggest challenge for us is to ask for help without looking weak. And as you might recall from the workshop, I talked about the importance of focusing on the other person. You're really good at fundraising. We'd love your input in this particular committee. Or, you're really good with people. We'd love it if you could help us with this social event. So focusing on how the other person might contribute rather than, oh, I'm so weak, I need your help, which doesn't sit well with the perfectionist. So that's the reason that's on the list of stressors.
Right. And then there is something that every project manager pretty much has to do and has to be, and that is trying to fix and control others. How does that cause us stress?
Yes. Well, as we well know, people sometimes don't want to be fixed or changed. And of course, that presents a challenge. I'm always reminded of the story I shared with the group, which is when my daughter was arriving, trying to prepare myself for her arrival by subscribing to the parenting magazine. And in the magazine, they said people are pretty much formed by 4 years old. So how does that, in other words, how can we possibly expect to change someone who's been that way since they were 4 years old? And for me, that was a wake-up call. The fact that people have been pretty much who they are for a long time. So it might be kind of futile for us to attempt to fix or change them.
Right. Well, the funny thing you did was you made people get up every time and say, no, are you a perfectionist? Are you trying to control others? That was a very nice, entertaining thing, because I actually had to get up for all of these 5.
That's right. I think you got an aerobic workout, Cornelius.
Yeah, I did. The fourth one here, and we're skipping number 3 because number 3 is the one we really want to focus on. So number 4 is over-analyzing.
Yes.
How's that?
Well, often people do things and then we ruminate and obsess all day long. Why did they do that? What did I say to them? What could be the reason? We spend a lot of energy worrying about things that most often are not about us. And as you might recall, I shared my favorite 3 Ps for staying positive, first of which was not taking things personally, because most of the time people are not thinking about us. Secondly, this too shall pass. And then thirdly, don't let this ruin my big picture. Personal, permanent picture. 3 ways that we can stay positive instead of hand-wringing and obsessing and overanalyzing.
Right. And then the 5th item on your list of habits that give us stress, people-pleasing.
Yes. One thing I neglected to mention in the presentation, which I really think sums it up, is somebody told me years ago the definition of resentment. And the definition of resentment is like taking poison and waiting for the other person to die. And so what happens is we do things to people and they bug us, and we're kind of obsessing about the fact that, you know what, it's miserable, they're awful, why do they keep doing that? I'm trying to please them, there's no pleasing them. And they're oblivious. They're walking along, going about their day, la, 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 la. And here we are going, because we've taken the proverbial poison. And so resentment is what builds up often when we attempt to please others and forego our own needs. And so that resentment causes us problems. And so I think, as I pointed out in the workshop, it's better to just say no, set boundaries, choose to pass on things rather than resenting the person for asking you.
All right. And then back to the 3rd habit that causes us stress, which is the one we really want to focus on. That is too many priorities. But before we look at that one in detail, you do this professionally, right? You fly around the country and you help people with these habits and other issues as well, right?
Well, my official tagline is helping people work together better. But my clients always say, just tell people you help them play nicely. Sometimes people are stressed and negative and angst-ridden at work and not playing so nicely. So yes, for 20 years now, I've been traveling around within the country and even internationally to conferences, companies, and even campuses.
Right. So. And people, trust me, she's really good. As a matter of fact, when I walked out, people, as I was walking out, were saying, oh, I hope they bring her back as a keynote speaker next year. This would be so great.
That would be great.
So that is a really nice compliment there. How can people find you?
Well, the easiest way is to go to my website, which is SaritaMabin.com. And that's, of course, SaritaMaybin.com. Or negativitytopossibility.com. And same website.
All right. Perfect. Now, back to the third habit here. Too many priorities. I think everybody listening to this podcast can empathize here. But why do too many priorities cause us stress?
Well, all of us have many balls that we're juggling at any given time. And at some point, some of those balls are going to bounce onto the floor, roll away. We're going to trip over them. Everything's going to come crashing down unless we decide which things are most important. One of the things I find interesting is that that's ever changing. I pointed out to the group in the presentation that I'm now an empty nester. So my daughter is off my top 3 at the moment in terms of day-to-day priorities. Other people have work priorities. I was having dinner with some of the folks here at the conference, and one guy last night said, I've just decided to go back to school. And so my family knows that that's in my top priorities. So the challenge is to not only figure out what your priorities are right now, but also decide which things can be put off, which things must be done on a given day, and determining, as we discussed in the presentation, what's important, meaning has a major impact if it doesn't get done, versus what's urgent. Some things have no deadline. So always balancing what's deadline driven, what's important. Sometimes it's both.
Right. And you reminded us of the 4-quadrant, the 4-square quadrant.
Yes.
What do you call this thing by Stephen Covey? I don't even have a name for it.
Yes. Well. In fact, I don't know.
Matrix.
Matrix is very good. Yes. And Stephen Covey, the late Stephen Covey, actually did popularize that matrix. And years ago, when I worked in university administration, we used that same matrix, if you will, with students and staff, and certainly now it's quite popular thanks to Stephen Covey. But one thing that's interesting is there's 4 boxes, and the first box is where we camp out. That box number 1 is things that are deadline-driven, urgent, and they're things that make a huge impact. My favorite example, it was someone mentioned payroll. I don't care what industry you're in, what kind of job you have, payroll at the workplace and then paying bills at home. Those are the make or break things that are urgent and important. But I find most people are really troubled by box number 2, because box number 2 are things that have huge impact, but don't have a deadline. So it's very easy to put off things like, someday I'm going to write that book. Someday I'm going to spend more time with the kids. Someday I'm going to eat more healthy. Someday I'm going to go to the gym. Some of the things that really drive our lives and make them or break them are put off indefinitely. And that's box 2. And really where we should be spending more time, but without the deadlines, it's hard to do that.
Yeah, you asked us actually to look at these 4 boxes, and we will be looking at the other 2 in a bit, and also give some tips on how to actually structure this. You were asking us to put percentages on these boxes. And to me at the beginning, the most strange thing was, why should we spend so much more time on box number 2? Things that are not urgent, so there is no deadline, but they are important. And suddenly I realized it, and I thought, you know what? If I had spent more time on all the renovations I had to do in my house over the past 4 to 5 months, and had taken care of it at the time that I had thought of it, even though there was no deadline, it would now not have come back to haunt me. And now, suddenly, it moved from the second box, not urgent, but important, all the way up to, it's urgent, important, I have to do it right now. Now I have to firefight, I have to put it in there. So this was an epiphany to me. Focus your energy on the things that are important, but not necessarily urgent, not deadline.
Exactly.
Get them done now, get them out of the way. You get so much more done, because later on, you're just going to be stressed.
Well, in a perfect example, I love your house renovation example. That's a classic example. A similar example is the person who says, someday I'm going to join a gym. I'm going to work out more often. Maybe I'm going to eat healthy. Someday I'll get around to eating more healthy. And then what happens is they go to the doctor and they say, you're going to drop dead of a heart attack. Bam! All of a sudden you've been thrown kicking and screaming into box 1 because now your health is of dire urgency because of the procrastination. So the house renovation example, the putting off the staying healthy until you're now getting the bad news from the doctor, those are all things that end up in box 1. Everything ends up there when it's procrastinated.
All right. So once again, we have this matrix with these 4 boxes. Box 1 is things that are urgent and important, so they have a deadline, they have an impact. Box 2 is they are not urgent, but they are important. What's box 3?
Well, box 3 is what I call OPS, stands for other people's stuff. And we spend a lot of time doing that. Bosses giving us things, children making demands, family members making requests. And I always say that it's okay to be in that box, but we have to decide how important is the relationship of the person who's asking me. Too often we do everybody's stuff and really aren't getting our things done. It's not something that's on our priority list, it's on someone else's. And we would want to do some of that. I contend only 10% of our time because that is important for the relationship. People say, well, what about my job? I'm doing my job, and a lot of that stuff is my boss has asked me to do it. But I say when you signed on for the job, you saw the job description, all those things that it said you were supposed to do. So there is that, you can't put that in other people's stuff. You signed on for the job, and so therefore that's going to be things that are either deadline driven, probably box 1, or maybe things that are in box 2, important, but no deadline.
All right. And then box number 4, not urgent, not important.
As
What's here?
I like to say, why? Why are we even in that box? And certainly people say, well, what about my downtime? I want to relax. I want to shop. I want to watch TV. But those are all relaxation items. And I always say relaxation item should be in box 2. Things that are not urgent. As I said in the seminar, relaxation has no deadline. So things we do for fun, those are box 2 things to rejuvenate. Box 4 are things that we really do that just waste time and aren't serving any real purpose. Like when I go down the rabbit hole, when I go to check email and come out hours later.
Oh, yeah.
That's sometimes a waste. I get drawn into the joke of the week, the story of the year, whatever.
Okay, so let's take a look at the percentages that we discussed in the class, meaning how much time should you invest into each of these boxes. And I already said box 2, the ones that are not urgent but are important, that's the biggest number. However, the smallest number is box 4, right?
Right, which is 0. Really, we shouldn't be spending any time in that box. Now, certainly, again, we can do things that are leisure, that are fun, but keep in mind, those really are things that are box 2. There's no deadline, but they somehow serve us to relax. Yeah, so
Yeah.
Zero is the ideal.
Right. So
Most of us don't live that, but 0 is the ideal for box 4.
If it's not urgent, if it's not important to you, then don't even bother with it.
Exactly.
Put it away, forget about it, delete it, out it goes. Don't spend any more time on it than that.
Yes.
Okay. What's the next box in percentages up?
Well, the next one, of course, is box 1, which is 30% of our time. And people spend a lot of time putting out fires, running from one deadline to the next. And I think that's just a fact of life. We can't get rid of that, putting out fires or dealing with deadlines, because there are things, like I said, payroll, projects. In the project management world, it's all about deadlines, milestone after milestone after milestone. And that's all box 1. And so 30%, a third of our time, give or take, is what we consider reasonable.
Okay. Oh, wait, we skipped over box 3, urgent and not important there. That's 10%.
That's 10%.
Right. Okay.
Other people's stuff, 10%.
Right. And
yes.
you had a very nice example there, what other people's stuff means. Your daughter plays, is it soccer?
She used to play soccer,
Exactly.
Yes.
And even though it was not important to you, it was still urgent because she's important to you. Therefore,
Yes.
it becomes urgent and you want to support her in doing that.
Exactly.
So this is a personal choice, of course, of doing it that way.
Exactly. It's funny because I just had an interesting conversation right after the presentation with someone who said she's doing words with friends. Mm-hmm. And the words with friends, she said they told her in her little discussion group with her colleagues that she thought it was a waste. And they said, no, it's not a waste. It actually serves a purpose. And she couldn't figure out, she says, how could words with friends serve a purpose? And I said, well, perfect example. That's on my to-do list for tomorrow, to sign up for Words with Friends, because I was just visiting my family, and my 84-year-old dad, who's retired, plays Words with Friends. And that's how he stays connected. So he plays with my daughter, his granddaughter. He plays with various other relatives. And he says, why don't we play words with friends? Personally, I heard people talking about it and thought it was a waste of time. But now it occurs to me that for him, that's going to be our way to stay connected on a regular basis. And I'm a fan of Scrabble and like words, and he likes words. So that's on my to-do list, is to download it tomorrow and do that with my 80-year-old father.
How do you get your tasks into these boxes?
How do you mean? How do you get them in?
Yeah, how do I get them in? I mean, when I wake up in the morning, I have like 6 million emails, and I have to decide, what am I going to do first? What's your personal approach? How do you decide which box these things go in?
Well, some things, deadlines obviously go automatically into box 1. So if there's a deadline, that's going to be the most important. So if I see, okay, I have a proposal due, there's a project deadline, I need to get back to a client on a certain time frame. Those are obviously the things that are, if they're important to me, or rather if they have a deadline, I determine the importance. So urgent and important, box 1 is always my first priority. However, there are some things that don't have a deadline. And I know that they're important, not urgent, but important. And so I will assign them a deadline by holding myself accountable. So in other words, I'll send a client a message and say, I got your email regarding this particular possible opportunity to collaborate. Let's set a time on the calendar, and we'll do that next week at X, Y, and Z time. And we'll come up with a time to actually meet, because that's now pushing it up into the urgent by giving it a deadline. But normally my first reaction is, what has a deadline coming up? If the deadline is 3 weeks away, that's probably not going to be on the top of my list. But I look at, what are my priorities this week based on deadline, and then how can I assign deadlines to other things that don't have deadlines to bring them into the radar in the coming weeks.
So if I had assigned a deadline to my home improvement project, it would already have been done and taken care of.
Yes, and I'll tell you, the big projects are scary because we put them off indefinitely. And so, for example, I talked about the Swiss cheese strategy, which is taking a big project and poking holes in it. So, for example, the renovation project, let's use that. You might say, well, I have this big project. What can I put on my to-do list and put in box 1 and make it urgent this week? Okay, this week I will make a list of all the things that need to be done, and then schedule for next week. Next week, I will make a list of the people I need to contact to get these things done. Okay, so we're actually assigning urgency to things that otherwise might get put off forever. It's like a woman said in one of my seminars. She says, Sarita, when I have a huge chunk of time, I'm going to go back to school and get my degree. And I said to her, I'm curious, when is this huge chunk of time going to become available? And she just looked at me blankly and suddenly realized the foolishness of her comment, because there was never going to be a big chunk of time. Most of us will never have a big chunk of time. So I said to her, why not just start making a list of things that you have to do, download the application, or find out which schools offer the program you want, schedule time to fill out the application. So we chunk it down, kind of the Swiss cheese, poking holes.
Smaller bits and pieces.
Smaller bits and pieces, little milestones, little bite-sized goals, because otherwise these big things that we want to do never happen.
All right. I'd like to continue with the final slide that you showed us, of which the first one was the Swiss cheese approach, and then you gave us 4 more ideas on how we can actually get things done. But before we do that, you're also a published author, right?
Yes. In fact, my book is called, If You Can't Say Something Nice, What Do You Say? And the subtitle is Practical Solutions for Working Together Better. And it's available on Amazon.com. So feel free to go check it out.
All right, good. So next to the Swiss cheese approach that will allow us to actually get all those tasks done that we have in our boxes, hopefully box 2, is the one you're really focusing on. What other approaches do you have for us?
Well, one of the things I really like is the multitask. And of course, we're all masters of multitasking. However, in this context, I'm referring to that unpleasant task, maybe filling out some reimbursement paperwork for expenses, or filling out that report you have to get in quarterly, taking that unpleasant task and pairing it with something positive. So if there's some positive thing that you might do, perhaps you like to go relax at the beach, taking time to go lay at the beach, work on your computer at the beach, doing your paperwork or proverbial paperwork on your computer at the beach might be a way to combine that. So finding some pleasant opportunity or circumstance surrounding to do the unpleasant. And then again, coupling that with the poking holes, bite size, a little bit at a time. The other thing I always like to talk about is the authorized list, because we have endless things that need to be done. And so when we procrastinate, it's almost like acceptable procrastination, or I'm trying to think of a good phrase for it, procrastinating with permission, so that we then go off and do one of these little tasks. Like for me is writing thank you notes to clients. There's endless little things that could be done, and then coming back to the big project that we've put off. But as long as we have that ongoing list of little things that can be done, even sitting and waiting for an appointment, your client is late. Now you've got half an hour to kill. Go to the authorized list and do some of those things when you can't work on the big project.
Right, and we project managers have things that need to be taken care of constantly. You need to update some kind of a status. You need to review somebody's status that they sent to you.
Mm-hmm.
You have to get in touch with people and see how far are you along. So there are all these little things that we can say, this can go onto my authorized list. And these are the things that are really, urgent, important. I need to work on these constantly. So I'm putting these on a list of things that I can just scan and go and say, okay, right now I have some time. I'm going to do this here, and I'm going to get this one done for today. And then I'm moving on to something else.
Exactly. And of course, the dark side of that is we may have a week where we say, wow, I've checked all these things off my to-do list. And in the end, we have to be careful not to totally focus on that little list. Because sometimes we say, I got 20 things done. But have we made headway on the big project, though? Have we done some of the little bite-sized things? So I feel like it's a double-edged sword. It's nice to have an authorized list of things we can use. I call it procrastinating productively. But at the same time, we don't want to totally stray indefinitely from the big project. I do want to also mention the importance of involving others, having accountability partners, people that you tell, this is what I'm working on, so that those people then come back and say, have you done it yet? Have you made any progress? Sort of like when I wrote my book, I remember people saying, have you started the book yet? I literally, in fact, to this day, if I had not had an editor who said, I need a chapter every month, 1 or 2 chapters every month, the first week of the month, that little hand-holding by my editor was how I got the book written. If it was not for that accountability partner, my editor, serving in that role, I would have continued to procrastinate another how many years?
Yeah, and your editor put urgency on the task by putting a date onto it.
Exactly.
Put it into box 1 for
Put it
you.
in box 1. And as we pointed out, ideally, we can put things into box 1 by giving them deadlines, or at some point, push will come to shove and we'll be forced into box 1, kicking and screaming. It's better for us to proactively put deadlines and move it into urgency, rather than, the heart attack is upon us and now we're thrown into box 1.
Right. So we had the Swiss cheese approach, we had multitasking, we had the authorized list. What else was
Involving others.
Involving others. And then, of course, finally...
Just do it.
Right. Just do it. And here's something that I actually like to do. While I like the just do it approach, I like to just do it for 15 minutes. I'm tricking myself a little bit. I'm going to say, this is an unpleasant task. I don't like to just do it. But you know what? I'm going to sit down. I'm going to take 15 minutes. I'm going to work on this. And, more than once has it happened that, after 2 hours, I'm suddenly noticing, my 15 minutes are long past and I've done so much more. I actually enjoyed doing the work. So just do it is something that we need to take to heart as well.
Exactly. I do want to say, just as a closing thought, people sometimes say, well, Sarita, what are you doing teaching how to get more done with less stress? I thought you were a communication expert. And I always say that really the reason we are stressed most often is that we don't communicate our boundaries. We don't say no nicely. We don't ask for the help we need. So in the end, I really think that all of this stress that we suffer in some ways goes back to not communicating what we want and what we need. And being able to communicate, set those boundaries, say no nicely, all of that serves us well in staying stress-free, or at least less stress.
All right, once again, if you want to know more about Sarita, please go to saritamabin.com. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Cornelius. I appreciate it.